And welcome everyone. I'm going to share my screen. So my name, yes, it's Paige Elkins, and I am a solutions engineer for SpinifeX. Before joining the SpinifeX team, I spent many years working in an SAP environment with both US and Canada payrolls. So many of the challenges that we're addressing with our new product, Easy Balance for Canada, come out of my own personal experience. Some of you joining today are already familiar with our Easy Balance product for the US, and so I'm really excited to introduce to you today this latest offering specifically for Canada. So let's get started. So what exactly is Easy Balance? Well, it's basically a suite of reports. They are specifically geared towards payroll and tax, auditing and validating your data. So for example, Easy Balance includes reports that will audit for undesired results like negative amounts, negative tax amounts for sure, that are going to result in an error when you run your T4s. Easy Balance reports deliver the results at a high level, which is nice because at a glance you can see if you have any issues, but then they also include the ability to drill down into the specifics so that if you do see something out of balance, you can get into the details of exactly which employee is causing that problem for you. There's other functionality delivered by Easy Balance, which allows you to validate the actual configuration of your wage types in terms of how the taxability has been set up on those. So the idea is by using Easy Balance throughout the year, you can keep on top of those things that are going to cause grief at year end if they go unresolved. Notice too that Easy Balance, in addition to the reports, includes pre-delivered employee correspondence documents and forms. For example, notices that you can generate and send out to your employees to ask them to validate their address and social insurance numbers. Common thing that a lot of payroll departments do towards year end because they want to make sure the data is clean before they produce those all-important T4s. So you're going to see when we move into the system that we have Easy Balance organized around these three general topics. They're actually three individual folders when we get into the system. So that's how we basically have summarized the Easy Balance functions. So let's take a look at those three. We'll start with the first one, which is validation and exception reports. So this is where you'll find the validation of your tax-related configuration on your wage types. So are the right wage types being accumulated into your taxable earnings? Plus, we have pre-delivered exception reports for things like employees whose province for health tax purposes doesn't match their province of employment. Might be that's fine, but it might be something that you want to, be able to analyze. So we've got reports on items like that and similar. And if we look into the second bucket on the screen, reconciliation and general reporting, there you will find several different kinds of reports. One of them that's mentioned here is the reconciliation between what happened in payroll and what got posted over to the general ledger. And then finally, I mentioned the employee correspondence. That's our third bucket on the screen here. So we have correspondence like that address, social insurance number, verification I mentioned, as well as we also have some more general documents, not really employee letters, but documents you could generate. For example, we have one that will tell you your source deductions to report and remit. We have that both for the CRA and Revenue Quebec. So let's talk a little bit more about the topic of exception and out of balance reporting here for just a minute. As I mentioned, Easy Reporter does come pre-delivered with a long list of reports, and you can see them listed there in the screenshot. And as you review that list, let me remind you that even though the focus is on a clean year end, these reports are meant to be run all throughout the year so you can really keep on top of things. And if we just look through that list for just a minute, I'll point out a few. We have T4 master data audit. I'm going to show you that one. It'll look for things like invalid addresses, social insurance numbers. We have a few down. We have the Canadian vacation payout. I'll show you that one in the system. That one allows you to compute that year-end true-up that you have to do to see if you've paid out enough paid vacation to each of your individual Canadian employees. We have a, well, let's see, a multiple T4s audit. That actually checks to see the employees who have results in more than one province. So you know that they're going to get more than one T4. Let's see, we have tax exempt status, InfoType 464. We give you that in both a report format as well as a letter that you can generate for the employees. And InfoType 461 tax assignment audit is on there as well. And I'll show you how that one works here in just a few moments too. So let's look at this example of the kind of master data auditing you can do. This is that T4 master data audit. It allows you to find employees who have missing or invalid data. So, obviously that kind of data that could affect your paycheck results as well as what goes on at year end. So we have, for example, on here, audits for employees who are missing or have invalid social insurance numbers. We also check for those employees who have addresses that are too long, in terms of the number of characters that are allowed on the T4. And if you look at my screenshot, you can kind of see over to the right in the red text where we've done some of these checks and showing you the messages that you need, so you'll know what you might need to do to go fix these people. And now let's talk more about payroll taxes and how is Easy Balance going to help you with those reconciliations. Well, I mentioned earlier that we give you the ability to compare what actually occurred in payroll to what posted to the general ledger. So to make sure everything is in sync on that. So we have that as a possibility. We also, Easy Balance includes a report that will reconcile your wage type /101 gross at the individual employee level to the taxable earnings, those wage types /102, /103, etc. So you're able to take your /101 gross, reconcile it to what got recorded as taxable, and that way you can, determine, did you get all your wage types set up, configured correctly. And as I mentioned before, we have those forms and letters like the tax remittances forms. Those are the ones that we'll produce for both the CRA and Quebec, similar to the CRA form PD7A. So I mentioned just a few minutes ago that /101 gross reconciliation down to what got reported as taxable. Here's a little peek at what that looks like. So if you want to follow with me on the screen, you can see we have the report rolled up at the company level, and then you expand it and you see your employees. So we start with a column gross /101. Then we have some ins and outs, some adds and subtractions to that particular value to arrive at what is reported as taxable. So we subtract out those items that are in /101 but yet are non-taxable. And then we need to add to it in the next column things that are not in /101 because they're not cash, but yet they are taxable. So we call that tax not paid. So we have our ins and our outs, and then we compare that to all your /102, 103, 104, etc. taxable wage types. The sum of those compared to our reconciled /101, do we come out with any differences, any wage types that pop out as, maybe we've got some sort of configuration error going on. So you can see in my example, I've circled that, if there is an unreconciled difference, like here we have a $180 difference. It's easy to see. We have that one column showing you if anything is not reconciled. And then if you expand on that particular employee, you can see the actual wage type out to the side. So now you can really narrow down your focus and figure out, where you have something not configured correctly. And then flipping it back over to the master data side, I showed you on a previous slide how you could audit addresses, social insurance numbers. We have the report for that. We also have a report that will allow you to monitor who's claiming exemption from tax withholding. And other reports that we have in regards to master data will show you their tax jurisdictions. So you can see, are there any inconsistencies, like people who might have a province of residence configured for them on their InfoType 461 that doesn't match their actual address. And I will demonstrate that particular report for you here in just a little bit. This one is actually the exempt status monitoring. So you can see who's claiming exemption from various employment taxes, as well as the reason for their exemption. And so in addition to running it as a report, which is what you're looking at the screen, so you have this ability, you can also run the document per employee that is based on this report. It's actually a letter that you could then produce and send to the employee saying, hey, we see according to our records, you're claiming exemption from these taxes. We just want to confirm that's correct, before we go too far. So I'll show you both of those here in just a minute. And finally, talking about those letters, I want to mention the distribution options that you have. You can print them and put them in envelopes if you want to go old school. But you don't have to do that. You also can make these letters that you're generating for your employees. Those can be available on your ESS portal for your employees to pull them that way. Or you can also set them up to just automatically be emailed out to the employees. So it just happens automatically, and so there's your distribution. You don't have to print. You don't have to, work that hard. You just generate the documents, and there they go. And I also, before we left our slides, I wanted to show you an example of the form. Now, this is not employee correspondence, but it's the document that you can generate where I mentioned similar to the PD7A, that you can see what your tax remittances need to be for a certain time frame, which you just enter when you run it. So I've got that on this particular slide. So you just get a little bit of a peek of how that looks. This one happens to be for the CRA. And then we have a very similar looking form that will generate for your Revenue Quebec. So now that you've seen those slides, you've got a little bit of a peek. We're going to actually move into the system and run a few of these Easy Balance reports. So let me get over here. I'm in my SAP system now, and I've already executed the transaction to get into Easy Balance Canada. Now, I mentioned to you on a slide that it was sort of organized around 3 topics, and that those would be folders in the system. And so that's what you're seeing here. I've got the 3 folders. So we're going to just go through here and run a few reports. Let's start with, we'll go with this middle one, reconciliation and general reporting. And I'm going to run the Canadian vacation payout report. I mentioned this briefly in the slides, but I didn't actually show you a screenshot of it. All right, so there we go. I will mention too here, if you're familiar with Easy Reporter or the US Easy Balance or Easy Documents, any of our products, you know that you can enter in your selection options and then save them as a variant. So we have our selection option tabs, which I know you're familiar with if you have any of our products. I've already entered in the options I wanted and saved them as a variant, so I'm just going to select my variant. So let's run this report. I'll just run it full screen. Okay, so now before I open this up and show you some of the results, see if I can move this up. No. Let's talk a minute about vacation and how that even works. So in Canada, as being Canadian payroll professionals, you know this, you have to ensure that your employees receive paid vacation equal to a minimum that is deemed by each province. It's a certain percent of vacationable earnings based on the province and the individual employee's tenure. So employers have this burden at year end to make sure everyone did receive paid vacation equivalent to or exceeding that particular provincial minimum. I know that at my prior employer where I worked Canadian payroll, we didn't really use standard SAP for that. We kind of had our own little process going to monitor that and to compute the payouts at year end. So, you may do the same, but what we're going to do today is talk about if you're using the standard SAP functionality. Because what SAP gives you in that regard is there's a payroll cluster table. It's V as in Victor, VC1, and that cluster table will be populated during payroll if you've configured it such with these amounts related to this calculation. And so what we can do here with Easy Balance is we can report directly off of the VC1 table. So that's what we've done for this little auditing report, is we're reading that VC1 table, assuming you're utilizing that for your SAP vacation calculations. So here's the report. Here's my results. You can see that it's rolled up at the company code level. When I start expanding, my first expansion is going to be employee number, which for my variant, I just included a few employees. You can see if you read across the page right now, we have vacationable earnings. We have the required payment for legal purposes. That's the provincial minimum. We have required payment company policy. You can have an additional, a separate requirement, and so we have that applied as well. We have did they receive any actually paid out during the year, which for all of our examples happen to be 0. We also have a column for manual payouts where you can configure just a little bit differently in addition to the auto paid. And then as we continue across, you can see we do the difference comparison to what did the person actually receive during the year and what should they have in terms of the requirements. And if I open up an employee, you can see a little bit more information. For my particular example, I ran it over a very short time frame, pulling in just 3 different payroll results. But it's going out there, it's reading the VC1 table for those payroll results, giving me these dollars. You can see the percentages, the 6% by law, the 4%, which was our company policy, and then those are utilized in the calculation going across the page. So that is one way, hopefully would be helpful to you if you're using the VC1 table and standard SAP to do your vacation calculations. I think you can make great use of this report in Easy Balance. So let's see what's next. We're going to look, I think, next at validation and exception. And I mentioned in the master data area, we have an Infotype 461 tax assignment audit. So I'm going to run this one for you. Again, I have a variant already saved out there. So I'll select that. I'll run it full screen. And here's what this report is doing. It's going out there and reading a couple different places. It's looking at Infotype 6, the address. You can see we have a column on here. Infotype 6, the province from the subtype 1 of Infotype 6 address. And then it's going out and reading Infotype 461, which as a practitioner, you're probably used to dealing with, where you know that there's 4 different fields that you populate for every employee. Their province of residence, their province of employment, their province of employment jurisdiction, and then the last one is the province of health tax. So we're going out, we're pulling in that data as well, and then we're doing some verifications. First of all, I have, if you can see out here on the side, missing Infotype 461. So where those columns should be completed for these employees, they don't even have an Infotype 461. So we've got that as a check going on. If I go across the page, and I'll scroll down a little bit, you can see some more. I have an error message here where the column says multiple province and Infotype 461, and then the message itself says multiple provinces, check. So, well, here's what that did. It looked at those 4 different fields. So for this guy, it was Ontario, Ontario, NT, Ontario. And so, that immediately, flips the switch and says, you might want to look at this. I understand it could be a totally valid scenario, but we thought it would be a nice thing to build into this report so that anyone who does have a difference, you could audit for that and at least keep your hands around who has it and who is that a legitimate choice for. So that's one of the checks done. We also have, I scroll down, we have a res mismatch. Actually, the column header says compare address and tax res for residents. So here it's saying we have a res mismatch, which means the Infotype 461 residents for their tax purposes does not match their province on Infotype 6 on their address. So here we have, for this employee, Ontario coming from info type 6, but Saskatchewan coming from info type 461 for their province of residence. So we call that a mismatch, and figure that you probably want to check that out and see if that's data that needs to be corrected. And then let's see, what else do we have down here? I think we also have, missing info type 6 as well. So if they don't have an info type 6, that's going to throw a message, as well as the missing info type 461. So that is the tax assignment audit, looking at info type 461. All right, and the next one I'm going to talk about is the tax exemption letter. Let's move over and talk about the employee correspondence. So I've got a folder out there for that, employee correspondence. Let's open up Canada tax exemption letter. Tax exemption letter. I've got a variant that I will select. And I'm going to run it. Now, when I go to run it, it looks a little bit different than when you're running a report. It actually says run the document. And then the next screen says generate document. The reason why this looks a little different from when we were running those other reports is this is the back end for this is actually Easy Documents. So if you have our product Easy Documents, you've seen this before. If not, here's a little peek of what Easy Documents looks like. So we're just going to click Generate Document, and it's going to run and create a separate letter for every employee that met our condition, which was to have exemption claimed. It's actually looking at info type 464, if you know your info types. So here's what my letter looks like. I have my company logo, which of course can be yours. We have the date, the name, the employee number. We have a little bit of text just saying, in order to ensure the accuracy of your paycheck tax withholdings, we want to confirm this information we have on file. And then here's the tax, and here's the reason for exemption. And then we end it with, of course, if this doesn't match your records, please contact us. So this is that tax exemption letter that you can generate. And as I mentioned before, you could print. You have the ability here to say print all documents. You can even one at a time use the PDF toolbar that pops up. You can set these up ahead of time, though, to be emailed. And let me just give you a little peek at that. So odds are you're going to want to do that instead of printing them out. So if you want to set these up ahead of time to email, you're going to come to a screen that looks like this. Again, if you have Easy Documents, this is going to look familiar to you. There are several options for how you set up your emails. You can pre-build lists. So there's all different ways, and we would teach you more about that in your actual training. But what I'm going to show you this time around is just the automated, which is the simplest version of setting up the emails. And I could say here, employees internet email. And what I have simply done right here is say, for every employee who gets this letter, who needs this letter generated, go read their info type 105, their communications info type, get their email address from that, and then send this letter to them, email it to them as an attachment. It will be a PDF attachment. All right, so that's a little bit about the distribution. So keep that in mind as well whenever you're generating these letters. And let's see, let's go back out. Nope, I think I just went too far. Bear with me. I'll go back in there. Actually, while that's running, I have another screen up. I'm going to talk about another report that I've got up on another system. So we've got a report that we built to kind of help you out with Quebec, since it's a little bit special. And so this report will look at people who have Quebec as their residence, people who have Quebec taxes or tax wages recorded, and see basically, are those in sync? Do we have Quebec people who don't have the taxes, or do we have people who have the taxes or who are not Quebec residents? Understanding, of course, that there are scenarios where those could be perfectly valid for your organization, but it seemed like a good starting point to help everyone, at least do some checks and balances in terms of who's being set up for Quebec taxation. So we've got this report out here, and you actually can run it two different ways. So I'm going to run it the first way, which is just the basic, I'm running the report. So I come in here, here's the report. I've got a variance that I'll select, and I'm going to run this for you. And this is going to actually report on all of my Canadian employees, regardless of whether they're Quebec or not. I'm just going to get all the data organized in a way to make sense of it. So it's rolled up at the company code level. If I expand, you'll see the first expansion is based on their address, the province from infotype 6 permanent residence address. So then you could tell, it's like I could say, okay, infotype 6 is Alberta. I don't have anyone showing up with Quebec, so that sounds like a pretty clean thing. That's probably good. However, I would expect down here with Quebec that I would have some. Now, if I have, for example, Ontario, this row has some Quebec taxable wages and tax withheld. May or may not be valid for your organization, but you could drill into it, take a little closer look. Our next expansions are personal area, personal sub-area. For my examples, I keep looking. I discover that I have someone in my personal area that's called Alberta for the finance department, which is a sub-area of finance, who has some wages and taxes under Quebec. My next expansion will actually allow me to drill right into the particular employee. And then at that point in time, I would just make a decision based on my own knowledge of my organization or my employees. Is that an error, an issue I need to look into, perhaps correct, or maybe that's perfectly fine for Mr. Khan. So this is one way to run the report. You run it wide open like this, you get everybody, and you can kind of see how everything is falling. But let's say you really don't want all the data. You kind of are just more interested in your Quebec residents. You just want to see the people living in Quebec, are they getting the right taxes? So we have another version of the report that will only look at the Quebec residents. And it's really easy to do because while you're in this same report, you just come over to report parameters. And there's a radio button. The default is all the employees, so that's what you saw. I can change the radio button right here and say, okay, now I want Quebec residents missing Quebec tax. If I run the report now, I guess we'll run full screen. All right, so I get a little bit shorter report, still company code rolled up. And in fact, I could, let's just expand this one. Using the expansion at the bottom, everything expands at the same time. So what you see here is a bunch of Quebec residents who do not have Quebec taxable wages or tax withheld. And the way it determined the residents, again, was by looking at infotype 6, at their address, at the province. So, these might be people that I need to analyze further because their address is showing they live in Quebec. So if there's a really valid reason for them not to be taxed in Quebec, I just might want to confirm that. And I will tell you, we added personal area and personal sub area, thinking that for a lot of organizations that might help you make that determination. You might be able to tell from that, oh, okay, no, it's perfectly fine. Like here we have residents of Quebec, but personnel area is Ontario, and maybe I know, okay, that combination, it's okay, this person doesn't have Quebec tax. So at any rate, that's another hopefully helpful report for you to validate what you've got going on with your Canadian taxes. So I will get out of here, and I believe that's a really good cross-section of what we're offering with Easy Balance. So we're at this point in time, I'm going to flip it back over to Vanessa and let you all ask any questions you might have.
Currently, we have 3 questions from our audiences. The question is, we purchased Easy Balance a few years ago and used the reports for our US payrolls, but I didn't see any Canadian reports in our menu. How do I get those?
Okay, yeah, good question. So, Canadian Easy Balance is being delivered with our 2018 Release 1, which is due to be out for customers around the beginning of April. So you'll have to upgrade to that version to have the option to subscribe to the Canadian Easy Balance, and then you'll need to talk to your salesperson for your area so that we can address the licensing and so that you can subscribe to that. And then between that, upgrading and then talk to your salesperson so that you can purchase the licensing, extend your licensing to include this product, then you'll be ready to go with it.
Okay, easy balance related question number 2. For the letters that are meant to be sent out to the employees, for example, who is claiming tax exemption and the address verification, is there a way to send them without having to print out and put in envelopes? I think this was answered a while ago.
It was, yes, when
In
I
one
was
of your
showing you
demos.
showing
Yes.
you the email options. Yes, and I only showed you one way of setting up email, the simplest, which is go look at InfoType 105 and grab the email from there. There are other ways to build distribution lists. There are ways to say, maybe you don't want it going to the employee, but you want them batched up and just going to the manager of the employee. There's ways to do that. Yeah, absolutely. Hopefully, you're out of the business of printing and stuffing envelopes by using this.
All right. So the third and last question would be, what types of taxes are included in the documents that summarize the source deductions to be remitted?
Okay, so we have for the CRA, your income tax withheld, and then CPP and EI, both employee and employer portions. Then for the Quebec document, it's the same. It's showing income tax. It's showing both employee, employer of QPP, Quebec health tax, your Quebec CSST, and the PPIP as well.
And that's it. Thank you everyone for attending, and we hope to see you in one of our user group meetings in Nova Scotia and in Montreal by April.
All right. Thank you, Vanessa, and thank you, everyone.